Hey everybody, welcome back to Example of Play. In this video, we're going to continue the Beyond the Pale series for EU5 as we attempt to learn the game by playing as the Lordship of the Pale and creating a united and free Ireland eventually. We'll need to learn how to play the game along the way if we're going to have any hopes of doing that and breaking away from England. So let's go ahead and get started. In this video, we're going to cover three topics. We're going to look at automation of the game functions. We're going to look at the trying to balance our budget, and then we're going to look at the estates and kind of the basics of how they work. So it's fair to say that EU5 is the most complicated game that Paradox has ever put out, and that's saying something. If you're familiar with the other games that they've created, EU5 has a lot of systems, a lot of mechanics. It is simulating things at a really nitty-gritty level in some cases. Handily, though, they have added automation to the game. So you can come over here and you click this little gear icon, and there's a whole menu of things that you can automate and let the game handle them for you. And this is really nice, especially if you're like me and you're just learning the game. And you might want to say, I don't want to have to micromanage every single thing. I don't understand how all of this stuff works. You can just let the AI handle it for you. You can, in fact, automate everything and just kind of watch what the AI does and jump in when you want to. We're not going to do that, but we are going to turn it on for a few things. Whenever you look in this menu, these are kind of like the big categories of things to automate. But if you come over here, and as you're going through these menus, you'll find the same gear icon on specific things. Like, for example, if you come over to your economy, you can automate balancing your budget entirely. Or you can come down here and say, well, I just wanted to automate a few things. Like, I just wanted to control the tax rate for some of my estates here, but maybe not all of them. Maybe I want to kind of fine tune one for whatever reason. You're making some kind of decision there at a smaller scale. You don't have to automate everything, so that's really handy. So just watch for that gear icon wherever you see it through here. Though do be aware, in some of these cases, if you click that, it's going to instantly do some stuff. So don't click it unless you're wanting it to take over and make some decisions for you. For right now, we're going to look over here and turn on a few things. So one that we're going to want to turn on for sure is trade, because trade is really complicated in this game in a good way. It's detailed. We'll see it eventually. There are tons of goods and resources, and there's markets and prices and all kinds of stuff. There's so much going into trade. We don't understand how it all works just yet. We don't want to have to mess with it, so we'll just turn that on. Just click there. Now the AI is going to handle trade for us, and by all accounts, it does a pretty good job. Probably better, well, definitely better than I could do right now, so I'm going to let it do it for me. On the other hand, we're going to try to play around with the budget and so that we can understand it, so we'll leave that manual for us, and we'll just turn on a few things in there. You can come down here and see the game can build buildings for you. At this point, we don't have enough money to build a lot of buildings, but if, say, you got a really big nation further into the game where you had a lot more money, you have a steady income, you don't want to be micromanaging every building, because as you'll see, there's a ton of buildings to be built. You could turn that on. We could even turn it on right now because it's not going to do it unless we have over 1,000 ducats saved up. So we're in no danger of having that much right now, but we'll turn it on for right now and see what happens. And then next we could let it control closing and opening buildings based on the profitability. We might do that right now since our big concern right now is going to be balancing our budget. So if there's buildings that aren't making any money, we don't need to micromanage that. Just let the AI turn that off and on for us. We can have it subsidize buildings. We'll leave that off. We'll let it do the closing and opening. We don't want it to destroy anything. We'll turn on RGO. So RGO means resource gathering operations. Those are like the raw materials that are every location in the game produces a different RGO. And this will, because if we open this up, you can see, oh wow, it's really complicated. There's a lot of goods out there, and there's a lot of stuff here we can do to try to like prioritize things and move them around. I don't know. We're not going to mess with that. We'll just turn that on and let the AI handle it for us. And when we click that, we see it turns on there as well. And then down here, these blue ones, though, we won't automate any of them because we want to control this, because this is really like us as the government, as the nation deciding things. So like what to research, that's easy enough. We can handle that. The laws, the reforms, the cabinet, those are important decisions that are few and far between. So we want to have control over that. So we'll leave all these things turned off. Because yeah, like setting what your diplomacy is, the AI doesn't know what your diplomatic direction, like what you're wanting to do, so we don't want it doing that for us. Eventually, we might turn on things like exploration and colonies. If we don't want to mess with that, just let the AI do it. But we don't have to worry about that because we don't have an army. We have a tiny navy, but we'll just turn those things on for now. But that is how you can come over here, turn on some of this stuff and let the AI handle it, and then you just play the rest of the game while you don't worry about the details. Which, whenever you're playing, so when you play EU5, you're not really playing as like a character. You're not even the ruler of your nation necessarily. You're more like the spirit of your nation. Because if we look here, our ruler is actually King Edward III of England, who is, because we're a dominion of England. So really, he's our ruler, and we're kind of playing as like the local government of the Pale. And so we're choosing as the spirit of the nation where we want it to go, regardless of who the ruler actually is. And so that's why when I think about these things, think about like where you want the game to go. So anyway, that's how automation works. Turn it off and on as you please. And now let's move on to the next topic. We're going to look at the budget. So now let's look at perhaps the most important resource in the game. There's a lot of important things, but really at the end of the day, your bottom line is always going to be critical. So if we come up here and hover over this, these are our ducats. This is how much, I don't know if I'm saying that right, but that's what I'm gonna go with. This is how much money we have. Our gold is at 79.52 and we're losing 3.88 per month. And so that's not good. We want to be making money. Even if we're only making a little money, making some is a lot better than losing a chunk of it every month. Underneath here, we can see where our money is coming from and where it's going. And we can see our income is mostly coming from taxes and some from trade, which we've now set our trade to be automated, so we'll hope that that goes up. We'll see what happens. And we're also making a little bit diplomatically, which I'm not sure where that comes from exactly, but oh, from all of our vassals. That makes sense. So we have a bunch of vassals, so they're paying us a little bit. Not gonna be a huge amount, but it's something. A little bit from minting, which we can basically make more money if we have access to gold and silver, which we'll look at that later. There is a little bit of silver out there in Ireland for us to go after, but we don't have direct control over it just yet. And we can see down here at the bottom, like I mentioned in the last video, the tribes, that's one of your estates. So we can see here the commons, the burgesses, the barons, they all pay a pretty good amount. The clergy doesn't pay any tax. I think there's like laws and things you can change later to change that. But the tribes, that is a big chunk. That's like a third of our population, and they're not paying, they're paying less than 0.01, so basically nothing. And so that's why we undertook that action to try to convert them into being commoners, so then they become part of our tax base over time. So that would be nice. Down below, we can see our expenses. So this is our problem. These are all things that we're having to spend more on than we're bringing in. And the biggest contributor to that is fort maintenance. And so we actually have a lot of fortresses. It's kind of the nature of our current position here. You could play a nation that has maybe just one at the capital, or could have plenty but be able to afford them. Our issue is we're kind of in a little spot where our situation here starting is messy. We control Dublin, we control a little bit along the coast, but to exert any kind of control in the other parts of our nation, we're having to have these fortresses out there, because if we see here, I'm trying to make it, let's see, if we look at the diplomatic, it's easier to see. So this green is us. We have territory kind of spread out all over the place. And so we have to have these fortresses there to exert some control to keep the locals from rebelling against us. And so that creates a problem where we actually have more than we can afford, because if we look here, one of our two big warnings is the non-integrated provinces, which we're working on that. We're doing that. And then the next problem is that we're over the fort limit. So you have a limit of how many fortresses you can have based on different things about your country, but you can read through all of them here. But basically how big we are, how powerful we are is going to set that. And then over time, of course, you can have more. But right now we have too much, and that's making our fort maintenance speed 25% higher than it would be otherwise, which really stinks because that is our biggest expense by far. So we'll look at maybe how we can lower that some. Some of our other expenses are coming from diplomacy, which, again, we make some money from diplomacy, but we're losing a lot to diplomacy as well. And that it ties into a lot of different diplomatic things, but also just spending money to increase our diplomatic power, basically. And we can see that up here. But we need that because we have 7 vassals, and we're in a complex diplomatic situation. So it makes sense that we're having to spend some to keep our diplomacy going. And then buildings are going to cost money. Buildings are going to make money, but they also cost money to maintain. But we set that one thing in the automation for it to automatically turn off ones that are not profitable. So hopefully that will help us there. And then diplomatic spending, again, money that we're spending to prop up our diplomacy. The cost of the court is money spent to basically make our government look good, be powerful, function. The higher you set this, the more you'll increase kind of your legitimacy. So, like how strong, how stable your government itself is. But it costs money to do that and to maintain it. And then we have food, which got to spend some money on food, but that's not too big of an expense. And then the Navy's costing us a little bit. So there's some things we can do about all of this stuff. And to do that, we can just click here and we'll change this back to that one. And so now we can look at our economy tab, which is going to be probably our most important thing to look at right at the start of the game. Because you can see we're still paused. We'll tick it along here in a second, but we'll look at some things here first. So looking at this tab, we can see there's three sub tabs. So there's balance, markets, and trading, which we've automated trading and markets, which you can just click those, turn that off and on. And we're going to trust that the AI is going to handle all of that for us and hopefully make us money more than we would make trying to do it manually at this point. But the budget, the balance of what we're spending, we can automate that too, but we can come down here and also manually control it. So you can see all of these different things down here from that tab up there and these little sliders where we can adjust them. So on the income side, we have minting, which basically we can turn gold and silver into money, but we only have a little tiny bit of gold and silver coming into our market. If we had a way to bring in more of one of those, we could just make money, which sounds great. But of course, if you know from reality, if you just make money, eventually you can run into an inflation problem. Now we could probably live with that. Some inflation over time would be fine. And you actually can see here, but right now it's nothing, basically 0.05%. So actually it's going down 0.05%. So we don't really care about that. If, say, we were to come into a gold or silver mine, like if you learned in history class about like Spain and Portugal bringing gold from the New World, you can make a lot of money, but you could also run into some inflation problems. But that would be a nice problem to have down the road. There is a little bit of silver out there in Ireland, and maybe later in the series we'll get a hold of it and bring in some money that way. Next, though, but basically this, you can crank it up all the way to the top if you want, but you don't have any access to that stuff. So if you don't have any, you can't really do anything with it anyway. But we'll turn it on. If you turn it on even just a little bit, it tells you, hey, you're inefficient minting because you don't have gold and silver to mint. Next is all of our taxes. So these sliders set our tax rate for our different estates, which we'll look at the estates in a little more detail as in the next part of this video. But basically, these are the different parts of our population. We can control how much we tax each one here. And then also we see how happy they are, so their satisfaction. And basically, as you might think, you increase taxes, it's going to drop that satisfaction some. So the happier you can get your people, the more you can tax them is the general idea. You can hit these little cogs here to turn it on to be automated. And what that will do is just always set their tax rate where it's pushing them towards 50 to be at least 50%. So there's a lot of things that go into how happy they are. We'll talk about it later. But basically, there's like a baseline happiness or satisfaction they can have that could be higher than 50%. And in that case, you could tax them a little bit more and keep it stable. But if you do something that upsets them, having this on will just automatically lower their taxes so it starts climbing back up. But we might not want it to do that. We might be like, okay, we're just going to have to live with one part of our population being unhappy for a little while so we can keep taxing them to bring in some money. But we could also just turn all of these on if we want to. So we'll try that out and see what happens. And like we mentioned, the clergy and the common and the tribes, clergy and tribes, they don't pay any taxes anyway. So you could crank that up if you want. They're not going to be paying any money. And the other ones, though, we could, in the short term, get some money from them, but we would see their satisfaction start dropping pretty hard up here if we cranked up their taxes. Now, over here on this side, these are our expenses. And we got to figure out what can we cut to try to balance our budget. And sometimes that's the hard thing is like, what can we do without for a little while? Now, the first thing is the cost of the court. So this basically directly ties into increasing our legitimacy of our government, which gives all these other benefits and malices depending on it. And you want to keep that as high as possible. So you do want to be spending some money so that it's always increasing, so that whenever we take various actions, there's a lot of things you want to do that are going to give you benefits, but it's going to cost you some legitimacy, which this might be a different term depending on which nation you're playing, but it's always basically like how strong your government is. And so we could drop this some. We're spending 2.2 on it. We're increasing by 0.29 a month. And so we could probably live with dropping that down some for right now. And we can see this graph up here actually shifts a little bit. So we could save some money and still be increasing a little bit. And since we're pretty high right now, we can probably live with that. Army maintenance, we don't have an army, so it doesn't matter. Navy maintenance, it's not very much, but it's a little bit. We could just live with it being that. We might have to just, it's not that much of the total, even if we cut it all the way down. Even if we destroyed our Navy, it wouldn't save us that much money. So we might be better off just keeping our Navy, our 2 ships active, and using them to maybe patrol the seas out here. And so you can also mothball your Navy. So just real quick, we'll jump there. If you pull it up, there is a button. You can disband them, but there's also a button down somewhere. This one. So you can mothball your Navy. So you can basically set them to be, they're at 10% strength. You'll have to spend some time to get them back up to strength, but their maintenance cost is cut in half. Now, if we had a really big Navy and we weren't expecting to need it anytime soon, or we wanted to mothball parts of it that we were only needed for war or something, versus enough that we need just to patrol for pirates and stuff, that might be a good idea to mothball part of your Navy. But since in this case, it doesn't really amount to that much, it might be better just to keep them active so we can have them doing something for us. Now, fort maintenance. This is our biggest expense. We have a bunch of forts, and so those forts are important. They're not just there for like war, and in war, they make it where the enemy can't conquer a location until they besiege the fort and defeat it, which can take a long time, like years in the game potentially. And that buys you time to bring in a different army, to maintain control of that location until you can do something about it, or just outlast them till the war's over. It also does things like keep the rebels down, helps you get control, basically helps you to extend your reach to that location anywhere you have some kind of fortress, which there's different kinds of forts. But right now, it's costing us a whole lot of money. So we could drop that maintenance down, and that's basically going to make all of those forts weaker. And if we suddenly got into a war, it wouldn't be good, because we would basically have smaller garrisons, and the fort's going to be less effective overall until some time is spent to build those back up. But right now, we're at peace and we're losing money. So we could cut that down. The most you can cut it down is to 50%. We might not want to do that all the way. We might see if we'll cut it some. So now we cut a pretty big chunk. We're still at about 60%. We're still losing a little money. And then you can manually control that. If you do go to war, that will jump back up to full. However much good it'll do you, it'll at least be helping you once you go to war. The next thing is diplomatic spending. So if we hover it, we can see this is basically sets how many diplomats we're getting, how much our diplomatic capacity is. So like basically how much diplomacy we can do and how fast it comes back to us. It also improves our subject loyalty. So it makes our subjects kind of have a baseline loyalty to us, which we have 7 vassals. So it's kind of important to have some of that. And we actually see right there, we're gaining plus 15. So that's helping us. These are all the benefits we're getting from our current level. If we drop this some, we actually can run into a little bit of an issue of we don't have enough diplomatic capacity. And because we have 7 vassals, we can run into some problems with our diplomacy falling apart if we were to cut our diplomatic spending too much. But we could probably cut it a little and see what happens. And we can get down to, all right, now we're only losing 0.89 a month. So that's not too bad. Now, next one here is stability. So you can spend money to increase the stability of your government. And you can see here, we're not spending any, and it's going up a little bit, 0.05, just based on some baseline stuff here. It's always your stability is up, there you go, right there. And stability plays into a whole bunch of things you can see here. Basically, the more stable your nation is, the more baseline happiness you have. You can get like a bonus to all of your estates from having really high stability. Everything's better when you have high stability, but sometimes it's a resource you'll have to spend sometimes to make changes like to your laws and things, changes to your estates, as we'll look at later. So you want it to be increasing over time, right now we're not spending anything on it, and it's going up a little bit. So we'll just leave it as it is. So with that said, we've looked through here, we've cut some cost, not quite enough, but we've at least slowed the bleeding down to just a trickle. So we'll hit play, and we'll maybe play out a couple months and see how this changes and if there's anything further we can do about it. Now I'm just going to play a couple months and just see if anything pops up, see if we can get our budget balanced, and then from there we can start building buildings, more locations, more buildings will basically get us more goods, get us more money, and there's a lot of tools we can use to help us build the most profitable ones, and not waste money on stuff that's not going to do us any good. But even we kind of need, it's like a snowball effect. You need some income, you need steady income so that you can start to expand. You can build roads, you can build more infrastructure, you can build those government buildings to give you more control over areas, which we'll talk about control probably in the next video, which it's a very important thing as well. And then you can also just keep growing your economy over time as you build more things. But if you're always losing money, eventually you're going to run out, and that's going to be a problem. And so we don't want to do that. So we'll skip ahead a month or two here and see what happens. All right, so I've skipped ahead a few months. Now it's October, and you can see actually we're not in that great of a position. Our expenses still jumped up, or our income went down. Some of that is from those automated changes to the taxes, I think, adjusted some of our tax rates. And so now we're keeping our people happy, but we're not bringing in as much money. And so we're still at minus 3.5. So now maybe we need to go back. We're gonna have to look a little harder. So fort maintenance, we can drop it a little more, as much as we can. Basically, we just need to stop this bleeding, because long term, we're moving towards some solutions. We're creating more commoners by shifting those tribes over to the commoners. We're integrating our regions into our government, so we'll have more control, which means more taxes. And we're building that trade office network, which should increase our trading ability to get us some more money from trades. All that stuff is going to help, but all of it's going to take time. And so we need to buy ourselves some time by cutting our expenses some more. If we look here, we dropped that maintenance. We could try letting the court be just kind of right at balance point, so it's not changing, but it's costing us a little less. We could drop our diplomatic spending some more, but that's where we might run into, I did kind of a test run of this, and we could run into a problem with our vassals outstripping our diplomatic ability if we drop that too much, but we could try dropping it a little bit more. I think if we look under here, our diplomatic capacity, we're at 1.53 of 1.84, so as long as we can keep it above that 1.53, we'll be okay. And so if we look here, diplomatic capacity is at plus 18%, so if we drop it too much, could lose that. Let's see if it adjusts in real time on that. That's 1.8. Yeah, so this is kind of getting nitty gritty, trying to find some money where we can. So now we have that's dropping down. We still have a little bit of a buffer there, but we're saving a little bit more money. So we've cut our expenses a little bit more. Let's look at some ways that we could maybe increase our income versus cutting our expenses. And for that, we're going to look to our estates. And so there's a lot more to cover than we can go into in this video, but we'll cover the basics and some things we can do to interact with our estates. So let's look at that next. So let's look at one of our most important other resources, our people. They're broken down into various estates, which you can come up here and see kind of at a glance how happy they are. Green bars are good, green is always good, red is bad. And then you can see what they are. Depending on which nation you're playing as, these will have different names, but generally you're always going to have some kind of nobles, some kind of clerics, some kind of business or middle class merchants, and then you'll definitely have commoners, which are further broken down into other subclasses. And then you may have tribes people. And then I'm not sure if there's any other estates that can be in the game, maybe some special cases, but these are the ones that I've seen over playing a few different nations. And some of them might not exist. Like you might not have any tribes people, you might not have a business class right at first, and then they pop up later. But anyway, to see them kind of at a glance, you can also click government, and then under that you have the estates tab, which you can automate this, but you wouldn't want to, because this is really a big part of kind of how you're shaping your nation. And you can see here at a glance, the top one here, the crown or whatever it's called for you, is basically your government. And so this is you as the government. These are your reforms. underneath that, and then here is how much power you have, your estate power. So like how much influence you have over the country, which depending on what you're playing, is going to be very different from nation to nation. And then below that are each of these, the little cards under them are which privileges they have. So the privileges are sort of like perks that you've given them that will change how your nation operates, like what it looks like, what that estate can do. And then any perks you give them or the privileges you give them will make them happy, but will also give them power. You can take away those privileges, but that's going to cost you stability. It's going to cost you a lot of stability. Like if we look here, we can't even revoke this one, royal marriage rights, which gives them, makes our cabinet more efficient, so that's good, but gives them a lot of power over our government, which makes sense. You can take it away if we had 130 stability, which we only have 30 stability, so we couldn't do that even if we wanted to. If we look down here, we have the other ones, and we can also see how many people, how many pops are in each one, and we can see, you know, our barons are only 1,315 of our pops, but they have most of the control of the government, which just real quick, you can actually hover here and see estate power at a glance. And ours is actually pretty balanced. The crown, the government itself has about a quarter, the nobles have about a quarter, the clergy have a quarter, the burgesses have a quarter, and then, funny enough, the massive bulk of the population, 90% of the population, falls into the commoners and the tribes people, and they have a little for the commoners and nothing for the tribes. So you can see how that power breakdown is quite different from how big those populations actually are. We can also look here to see that we can just bribe them if we had money. We don't have that kind of money to make them happy, but we can also give them privileges, which you're kind of free to do, but each privilege you give one estate is basically going to make the other estates unhappy, and it's also going to give that one more power over your government, more say, which you might be okay with depending on things, but the more power you give away, the harder some other things will be, and then undoing that can also be very hard, as we see the huge stability drops you get from taking away those privileges. So let's look at some privileges and maybe how we could use those to increase our income versus trying to just keep cutting expenses. Now let's look at giving a privilege. First, let's see which estate would we want to give a privilege to. Well, we always like the common people. They make up the biggest part of our population. They have only 2% of the power over our nation, but they pay the most of our taxes just from being the biggest part of it. And so I think maybe we want to make them a little happier. And we can see that the clergy, they're happy enough. They don't need anything else. And we see like our tribes down here, they have no power. You can give them privileges, but really there's no incentive for us to do that. So let's look at the commoners and all the things we could give them. You can see here, basically, there's a few that we can't do, but all these other ones you can do. Each one, for the most part, it varies sometimes, but most of these are going to give them plus 5% estate privilege or plus 5% satisfaction equilibrium. So this is going to bump up like their baseline happiness. So that's good, but it's going to take away some of the satisfaction from all the other estates. So generally, it's always going to be that a big boost for one is going to be a small minus for all the other ones. It's also going to give them some estate power, which we kind of want. They only have 2% estate power over our nation, and they're 2/3 of our people. So maybe we can give them a little something. And now if you look through here, you can see all the changes that each one of these things is going to do. Some of these are going to give you more resources. Some of them are going to change what your military looks like. Some of them, like this, can allow commoners into your administration. So it might give you more characters that you can add in, but that's going to play into like kind of the RPG side of managing your characters, which we'll look at later in another video. This one is going to have reduce your levies. So over time, maybe as you have a professional army, you're not going to rely on your levies so much. That might be one to take. But right now, we're going to be very reliant on our levies, so we don't want to do that. One that I'm kind of interested in is this free mobility for the common people, because it doesn't change like percentages. It lets our peasants and our laborers migrate, so they can move around from place to place, which in my mind, that would really be a good thing. It's going to let them move from places that are going to be unprofitable towards places where they can help us grow our economy more. Now it's going to drop our noble estate satisfaction equilibrium. So it's not going to be just that they're going to be upset about it temporarily. It's going to drop their baseline happiness some. But it's going to make our commoners happy, and it's going to probably boost our economy by letting those people move around to where we want them to be, where they're going to have better jobs. So I'm going to go with that one. Click it. And so simple enough, it's going to give you a description. And we say OK. And we can see, all right, it boosted their happiness 15%. Dropped everybody else. And then we got this little warning that, oh, The barons are upset, but they're still at 49.61%. So they're going to be dropping a little bit, but they're going to gain back 0.2% a month. So they'll be back to that 50% mark pretty quick. And then we can come back here and see that whenever we look, the commoners now, even though it said it was like a plus 33% gain in power, that's relative to their current power. Or at least that's my understanding of it. Because if we hover over this, we can see, yeah, they went from 2% to 3 point, so they're at 3% or 3.32. And that's coming from these things. And so that gave them a little bit of a bonus, but it's still like relative. So it's not, one privilege isn't going to change the estate power in a huge way. It's going to change it a little bit. On the other side, look and see that making them happier is going to let us, I should have looked at this before changing it, but it's going to let us tax them a little bit more because their baseline happiness is bumped up a little bit. And so that's one way we could get some more money doing that. We're still trickling money out, but we've at least reduced our budget a bit to try to balance it out. We'll look around real quick and see if there's any other way that we can do to try to get to a balance point. All right, so looking through the privileges, there's one other for our burghers or burgesses, the merchant class. We could give them the land of commerce, can't say it, perk, and that would increase our production efficiency 2.5% across the entire country, which we do have a fair amount of buildings. If you had like no buildings producing anything, you probably wouldn't want to do that, but we do have some buildings. And we're going to be seeing more buildings get built. So a 2.5% increase, that could be a little bit, give us some more money. It also make them a little happier so they pay some more taxes. Again, this is going to make the nobility a little bit unhappy, but we might beat up on them a little bit right now since they're in a good spot anyway. One thing I forgot to mention on the last one is that enacting each of these privileges does cost you a little bit of your legitimacy or whatever your government war is called. But we can see we're still fairly high up on that, so we can afford to spend a little to try to get us some benefits. So we'll do that one to increase that, and that's going to make them a little happier, and it's going to increase our production across the country as well. And then also it had the effect of shifting one of our values of our nation. This one, where'd it go? It highlight, okay. It also moves us towards a capital economy a little bit over time. And so this is an example of one of these changes that's going to shape your nation long term of what your values of your nation are, depend on these kind of things that you set, and then they very gradually shift over time, which we'll look at the values. You can see them here in more detail in a later video. Now this video, I think we're getting fairly far into it already. There's more to say on the estates, of course, but I think that at least gives you see the basics of who they are, how you can look and see how they're doing, and then how you can interact with them by giving them privileges or potentially revoking those privileges later. And the whole balancing act of making one happy is going to upset all the other ones. So we can see now our barons are at 44%, which is not great, but it'll come back up over time. And then the downside of that is they're going to be paying a little less taxes, but hopefully our commoners and our burgess class are just going to be paying a little more taxes. So we'll let the end of this month play out, and we'll see where we're at. We might not have managed to balance the budget entirely in the course of this video, but we've at least slowed it down to where it's kind of stabilized at losing just a little bit month to month, and that gives us some time to hopefully, yeah, so it's not changing too much. So we have, even at this rate, a few years to try to improve some other things to turn around our budget and go in the right direction. If you need to, you can take a loan. The loan is going to be relative to like how big and powerful and stable your government is. Different things play into it. But right here, you can take a loan from your people, from your estates. They'll show you like how much money they have available to loan you, which will come with an interest rate. But that might not be the worst thing if getting a little bit extra money lets you like build a building that's going to long term be really important, or in a war situation is going to let you hire some mercenaries to win a war. Might be worth taking on some debt over time. If you do have debt, you'll see it over here, how much you owe, how much interest you're getting on it, and so you can pay it back if you've got the funds. You can also take out loans from international banks, which will pop up. There's a few available right at the beginning, depending on where you're at in the world, and then some more will pop up over time. But I kind of like the idea of loaning from my own people more than from an international bank. And yeah, so I think this video has probably gone on long enough. My goal is to keep these fairly short, not get too long-winded. So we'll stop here for this video. We didn't quite balance the budget, but we did look at some ways to adjust it and try to mitigate our starting situation where we were hemorrhaging money, and we'll work towards making some money. In the next video, I'm not sure exactly what we'll talk about yet, but we'll probably I'll probably play forward a little bit and try to get to a point where the budget is balanced, and then we'll talk about that, and we'll talk about what we can do once we have a steady stream of income coming to us. So thanks for watching. Make sure you hit subscribe for more videos, and we'll see you next time. Bye.